Hello everybody. How are y'all doing out there today? Let me introduce myself. My name is Mr. Zach, and this is my very good friend, Miss Katie. We are very excited today because we're going to get to tell you all that we know about our home planet. That's right, that's the planet that we're on right now, everybody's favorite planet, planet Earth. We're actually starting a very brand new unit called the History of the Earth today. So, what does that mean exactly? Well, history is a word that we use to describe things that happened a long, long time ago. And Earth, well, that's the planet on which we live. And Earth, it has a lot of history. Scientists know that the Earth is very, very old. Actually, many scientists believe that the Earth is billions of years old. And since the number billions is such a large number, that means that the Earth is also very old. Scientists are always discovering new things about the Earth. The history of the Earth simply tells us all about the things that are or that have been a part of the Earth since its beginning. In this unit, we're also going to learn about cool things like fossils, rocks, minerals, geysers, and volcanoes. Okay? Now, I've got something on the table here you might recognize. You may have seen it in a school, or you may have one at home. You might have seen one in a library. But this is actually a small model of the Earth. And we call this small model of the Earth, we call them globes. Okay? And just like the Earth, this globe is in the shape of a big ball or a sphere. Models like this globe are important because they help us study things that might be too big or too small to examine up close. I mean, for example, I couldn't really put the whole planet Earth right here on this table to show you these things, could I? So that's why models like this globe are very, very useful. We can also use this globe to learn about a lot of things that are on the Earth already. As I'm spinning it, you might notice all these different colors, right? Well, if we see the land on the Earth, right? These yellows or browns or sometimes pinks. These are big pieces of land that are on the Earth that we call continents, these very large pieces, okay? And as we look at the globe also, you're going to notice that most of it is in this blue color right here. And that's the water on the Earth. And these very big blue bodies of water are actually called Earth's oceans. And we also know that as we go farther and closer to the middle or the center of the Earth, then that means that the climate, or it's typically going to be hotter at those areas. And the farther north and the farther south that we go, we get cooler temperatures. It's also cool to use the globe to show where we're located on the planet. To do so, first, we have to know a few things. Remember, we called these big pieces of land continents. So there are 7 continents, and as I spin the globe slowly, you can see all of those different continents. But if I wanted to find where I'm located on the planet, the first thing I have to do is find my continent, right? Well, I know that I live in the United States of America, which is on a continent called North America, okay? So here's the country in which we live, the United States of America. And you can see it's part of a bigger continent called North America. Now, since I know that I live in the United States, now we need to go down and find what state we live in. Now, you probably know that we live in the state of Mississippi. Now, when I want to find the state of Mississippi on a map of the United States, there's a really cool trick that you can use. You see how we have the United States, but as you go farther below, farther south, you'll see that you're going to hit another big body of water here called the Gulf of Mexico. Well, Mississippi is a state that's right above or just above the Gulf of Mexico, as you can see. And if we wanted to get even more specific and find out where we're filming today, we're filming in Jackson, which is a city. It's hard to see on this globe because there's so many things. But Jackson is a city in the state of Mississippi that's a little bit below the central or the middle part. So it might be fun if you could ask a teacher or a grown-up or a brother or sister to help you find where you live on a globe. Give it a try and see how you do. Now, about the Earth. Now, when we stand on the planet, it feels like the Earth is sitting still. It feels like everything is flat. But nothing could be farther from the truth. The Earth is always moving. Now, there are a couple of ways that the Earth moves that we can use this globe to demonstrate. First, as you can see, Now, if you look above here at the very top part, and then you look below here at the very bottom part, you can see that there's a little stick, right? That stick goes straight through the center of the globe. That stick is called Earth's axis. Now, don't misunderstand. If I was in space and I was looking at the planet Earth from really, really far away, I wouldn't really see a stick here, but the Earth rotates or spins on that axis just as though it were really there. Now, each time the Earth spins on its axis is one day. So every time you wake up and you see the sun coming up, that means that the Earth has completed one spin or rotation on its axis. Now, there's another type of movement the Earth does that's too big to show you with this. Now, in the solar system, the Earth is accompanied by 7 other planets with the sun right in the middle. So if you can think of the sun, the Earth, just like all the other planets, are always going around the sun or revolving around the sun. Okay? So it takes the Earth 365 days to make one revolution around the sun. And that's 1 year. Sometimes I like to tell people, since I'm 46 years old, I've actually been alive long enough to see the Earth revolve around the sun 46 times. How many times have you seen the Earth revolve around the sun? I'll give you a little hint. It's your age. Okay? Very nice. So today we're going to meet an interesting scientist. His name is Jerry. And Jerry loves to study all about the Earth. Listen carefully as I read today so that you can learn lots of interesting facts about the Earth too. Now, before we begin our read aloud, let's look at a few key terms that we need to understand in order to really understand the read aloud, okay? Now, our first word is equator. Can you say equator? Awesome job. Now, the equator is the imaginary line that runs around the center of the Earth. Now, if I use my globe again, you can see, just like if you remember, we talked about the imaginary stick or axis that goes through the Earth. Well, this imaginary line that you can see here that goes around the middle of the Earth, well, that's called the equator. And if you'll notice, it does something interesting. It divides the Earth into a northern half and a southern half. So just like the axis, if we were in a spaceship and we were looking at the Earth from outer space, you wouldn't see a big line going around it. But we use the line, the equator, for us to study and know more about the Earth so that we can understand it. Okay? Another key term is geologist. Can you say geologist? Give it a try. Awesome. Well, geologist is simply a scientist who studies the Earth. Geologist also is a really cool word because it's one of the words that if we know all the little parts that make it up, we can actually know what the word means. For example, if we look at geologist, it has 3 word parts that help us make meaning out of this word. The first part, geo. Anytime I see the word geo in a word, I know that that's going to have something to do with the Earth. Anytime I see the word part ology, I know that's going to mean the study of. You may have brothers and sisters right now who are studying biology in high school. And if I see the word part ist or ist at the end of a word, that generally tells me that that's someone who. So what's really cool about a word like geologist is if I know these word parts and I see that word, I know exactly what it means. Geologist is someone who studies the Earth. Awesome. Now, another word that's a lot like geology is the word geology. I mean, geologist, right, which is a person who studies, but the word geology is simply the study of the Earth. Scientists like Jerry that we're going to read about, they study geology, which means they study rocks and all about the Earth. Another important word to understand when we're talking about geology is the word pressure. Now, pressure just means the force of something pushing on something else, okay? So if I were going to take my hands and push them together, why don't you try this at home as well? If I take my hands and I put them together, and I'm going to push as hard as I can. Now, don't hurt yourself, right? But go ahead and give it a nice push. And you might even see it shaking a little bit because I'm applying so much pressure onto my hands. Pressure simply means when something is pushing on something else or the weight of it is pushing on something else. You may have even applied pressure to your arm if you had a cut or a scrape to stop the bleeding. Now, our last word that we're going to discuss today, and we're going to see in our selection, is the word surface. Can you say the word surface? Give it a try. Awesome. The word surface means the outside part or the top layer of an object. So when we're talking about the surface of the earth, that's where we are right now, because I'm on the top part of the earth. If I were to get a shovel, say like Jerry, right, and dig a very deep hole all the way down as far as I could, and then I got into that hole, would I be on the surface of the planet anymore? No, I would not, because I would no longer be on the outermost part. So now that we have a good understanding of these key vocabulary words, let's begin our read aloud to learn more about Jerry and the science that he studies, which is geology. Hello, kids. My name is Jerry, and I'm a geologist. A geologist is a type of scientist. A scientist studies and learns all about the world in which we live, and geologists are scientists who study rocks and what's inside the earth. That's right, rocks. From pebbles to stones to boulders, from a grain of sand to the highest mountain, rocks are everywhere. And I want you to know all about rocks, from how they're created to how they're used in people's everyday lives. People used rocks to make the jewels on this beautiful crown. A sculptor carved a big piece of rock to make this sculpture of Abraham Lincoln. People use rocks to make buildings, walls, and streets. Geologists use rocks to learn about the earth. In the ancient Greek language, the word geo means earth, and ology means the study of. When we combine these word parts, we have geology, which is the study of the earth. Since the earth is mostly made of rock, we geologists spend most of our time studying rocks. Many of the rocks we see on the surface of the earth, from mountains down to pebbles, are created by incredible forces at work deep inside the earth. Thus, geologists not only study rocks, but also all the forces at work inside the earth and on the earth's surface. We study the whole earth. Some scientists believe the history of the earth begins a little over 4.5 billion years ago. That's a long time. It's actually a very, very, very long time ago. Before that, some scientists believe that the materials that now make up Earth were orbiting or floating around our newly formed sun as billions of little bits and pieces, just like you can see here in this picture. Over many, many years, it is believed by some scientists that these floating bits and pieces gradually stuck together until they made up Earth, as well as its neighbor, the Moon, and the other planets. When it was newly formed, Earth was basically one big ball of hot, melted rocks. Over time, however, some of these materials cooled and hardened, allowing the planet Earth to become what it is today. Maybe you already know that the Earth is a planet. Earth is one of 8 major planets that orbit the Sun. Do you know the names of any of the other planets? Let's look at this picture and name them. The one closest to the Sun is Mercury. Right after Mercury, we have Venus. Venus is actually the closest planet to planet Earth as well. Right after Venus, we have yours truly, our home planet, Earth. And you can see it's colored blue, just like our globe here, because of all the water that's on the planet. Now, as we go farther out into the solar system, you'll notice that the planets are getting larger after Mars, which is right after Earth, our little red friend. And once you go a little farther out, you see the planet Jupiter, which is a giant planet. And then our ringed friend, Saturn. Go a little bit farther, and we can see the planet Uranus. And finally, we have the planet Neptune. Like all the other planets in the solar system, Earth is trapped in the gravitational pull of the Sun. This causes Earth to orbit or revolve around the Sun. It takes 1 year, about 365 days, for Earth to complete an orbit around the Sun. The Earth's orbit around the Sun is not the only way it moves in space, however. This map shows that the Earth's north and south poles. The north and south poles are imaginary points at the northernmost and southernmost parts of the Earth. The axis of rotation is like an imaginary line or stick going right through the Earth at the north or south poles. There's not really a stick running through the Earth around which it turns, but the axis is really just an imaginary line around which the Earth rotates. It takes 1 day or 24 hours for Earth to make a complete rotation. The map also shows the equator, an imaginary line around the middle of the Earth. The equator divides the Earth into 2 equal halves. The area along the equator receives the most direct sunlight and is therefore generally the warmest area on the surface of the Earth. Earth is a sphere shaped like a ball, and it is surrounded by a thick blanket of air called an atmosphere, where clouds float around. Most of Earth's surface is covered with water in the form of 5 oceans. And in this picture, we can actually see a few oceans. There's the Pacific, the Atlantic. Now, we can't see the Indian Ocean on this picture, but up at the very north part, we can see the Arctic. And then down here by the South Pole, we can see the Antarctic, or the Southern Ocean. Between these oceans, there is land in the form of 7 continents. We can't really see all the continents on this picture, but we can see our home continent, North America, and right below that, South America. Now, without those clouds covering up, we might be able to see Europe. And all the way down south is where Antarctica is. People haven't always known that the Earth is round or that it rotates on its axis as well as orbits the Sun. They haven't always known that there are 5 oceans and 7 continents, or that most of the surface is covered in water. It's taken hundreds of years for scientists and explorers to develop all the knowledge about the Earth that I just described in the last few minutes. But this barely begins to scratch the surface of what we now know about the history of the Earth. There are 3 important words you need to keep in mind whenever you're thinking about geology, which is the study of the Earth. Heat is the first. You can feel heat from a flame or from the sun on a sunny day. Heat causes many changes to the Earth. The second word is pressure, like the force you use when you push on something. Pressure, or the force of weight, also causes many changes to the Earth. Time is the third important geology word to remember. To understand geology, you need to think about time in a whole new way. Forget about minutes, hours, and days. These amounts of time don't mean much in geology. Geologists think in terms of many, many years, like millions of years, or in the Earth's case, even billions of years. It takes a very long time for pressure and heat to do what they do inside the Earth. The Grand Canyon, located in Arizona, provides a lot of clues about the Earth's formation and history. It took millions of years for the water to rush in the river to carve through the rocks to make this canyon. No other place on Earth allows me to see and study so many different layers of rock at the same time. The rock on the upper rim of the canyon is estimated by some scientists to be about 230 million years old, whereas the rock layers at the very bottom of the canyon are estimated to have formed over 2 billion years ago. That rock is half as old as the Earth is believed to be itself. Remember, heat, pressure, and time are the main factors in geology. If you understand those 3 words, then you're ready to move ahead and learn many things about the history of the Earth. All right, guys, wasn't that interesting? I hope that you learned a lot. I'm going to have my friend Miss Katie come up here, and we're going to ask you guys some questions about what we just read, and Miss Katie and I are going to talk through the answers, okay? So let's see how much we learned about our home planet, the Earth. And you feel free to answer at home. All right, Miss Katie, do you remember, what does Jerry the geologist study?
Jerry the geologist actually studies the Earth. Geologist means the study of the Earth, therefore Jerry studies the Earth. They're looking at many things such as rocks and sand and other things, right?
Right, absolutely. Geologists study the Earth, and since the Earth is mostly made of rock, geologists spend a lot of time studying rocks. And I'm glad you pointed out that it's one of these cool words that if I know the different parts of the word, it gives me good clues as to what they mean. Great job, and I know I heard some of you at home saying that too. All right, another question. Think hard. How are rocks used by people? What are some ways that people like to use rocks?
One of my favorite ways to use rocks is in jewelry, or like you talked about a crown.
Okay, like jewelry. So what kind of jewelry, what kind of rocks would you have in your jewelry, Miss Katie? What's your favorite?
One rock that's my favorite is a diamond.
Oh, I hear that's very popular these days. Yes, a diamond is a very, very beautiful rock that we use in jewelry. Awesome. And also, I just remembered too, we use rock to build. Where would we be without rocks to build with? And people also use them to carve things, to build things, and just like you said, to beautify things. So when we were talking about the Earth, Miss Katie, we talked about a special shape that the Earth is in. Yes, it's shaped like a ball, but there is a special word for that. Do you remember?
The special word for that would be sphere.
All right,
Yes.
Awesome job. That's right. A sphere is just the shape of a ball. That's the word that we use to describe that shape. So, Miss Katie, we were going back and using the globe to show the land and the water. So I'm going to try to trick you here, guys. Do you remember what do we call all the land on the Earth? There are 7 of these big pieces of land. What do we call those? Think about it. What do you think, Miss Katie? Do you remember?
I think they are called continents.
They are. So we have continents that cover the planet Earth. But as we talked about, as we look at this globe, most of the Earth is covered in this blue water. And these big bodies of water also have special names. What do we call those? Thinking real hard. Do you remember? What do we call those big bodies of water that cover actually most of the Earth?
If I remember correctly, when you talked about the globe, you talked about it being called oceans.
Yes, absolutely. I had to look back too. All these big blue things, these big blue bodies of water, those are Earth's oceans. Okay? Okay, here's another question. What is the equator? Do you remember that, guys? Remember we were talking about some things, some imaginary things on the Earth? One of them is called the equator. So it's a great shot here. You can even see it. So think about, what did we say the equator was? Can you help me, Miss Katie? I'm having a blank right now.
I think the equator actually divides the Earth into 2 parts. Since the equator is kind of like an imaginary line, we can think of it as dividing the Earth in half.
Awesome job. That's right. I'm looking back at my notes, and the equator is this line, just like you said, Miss Katie. It runs through the middle of the Earth, and it divides the Earth into these 2 halves. And the word equator sounds a lot like the word equal.
Equal.
Which what it does is it divides it into 2 equal halves. But remember, this is an imaginary line. If I went somewhere on the Earth and I said I need to find the equator, you're not going to actually see a line, but you can be where the equator is. Okay? And let's think, we want to go back one more question. We did this at the end, but these are 3 words that you're going to need to remember through all of these lessons. When we talk about geology, right, there are 3 special terms that we need to keep in mind. I'm going to give everybody at home just a second to see if they can remember them. Remember, Jerry told us about 3 special words right there at the end. Do you remember what they are?
I do.
Let's say them together.
Okay, let's do it.
1, 2, go.
Heat,
pressure, and time. Great job, guys. What a great start to this unit all about the history of the Earth. When we get together next time, we're going to continue learning about our planet, the Earth. Okay? Great job answering all those questions today. I'm so glad that all of y'all joined us. All rights and credits from this lesson belong to Core Knowledge Language Arts, and we would like to thank them for publicly sharing all these great materials with us. So go home and share what you've learned today. Tell somebody at home what you've discovered about the Earth. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye now.